I'm not a real big believer in coincidences, especially when it comes to this chess game being played down in South America. What you're looking at is a picture of the Peace Ark. It's a Chinese hospital ship in the background. It's arrived in Venezuela. Now, it's being escorted by a little Waikari-class corvette, but the real story is the three JL-8 Chinese attack jets in the foreground. The reason I don't think this is a coincidence on 23 September, and this actually came out 22 September, is this story that came out 18 September from Colombia reports that ever so coincidentally had a picture of a light attack jet in the background. Now, no one, I think, would be confused about who the U.S. would back in any kind of a conflict with Colombia and Venezuela. So that someone would put an article out just reaffirming it, but oh, by the way, getting photobombed by the jet in the background is, to my mind, a message. See, the U.S. has been, over the last couple of years, conducting this search for a light attack variant to step into certain roles that they think would be more efficiently filled by jets like this than, the more expensive F-22s, F-35s, all this. And so this is what I really think has been going on. That the U.S. has recently, Mr. Pompeo said that there's new plans for stepping up the efforts against Venezuela. And with the failed coup attempt just last month, I think there are plans in the works and they're waiting for the right time. Now, one of the big whammies in all of this is Brazil. They do their elections down there differently than we do them here. They have an election where everyone runs, and then if nobody gets 50%, then they have a runoff of the top two. We watched that happen in Colombia. This is how they do it in Brazil as well. Well, this guy Haddad, who was going to be the vice president of Lula da Silva, who's in prison, far-left Workers' Party, he was way behind, 13%, 11%, and this guy Bolsonaro, the far right, was leading with like 26 or 27%. There was 3 or 4 or 5 others that were out there as well. All of the others were center or left. He was the only one to the right. Well, now that Haddad, speaking of here, has been endorsed by Lula da Silva, who, if he were not in prison, would have run away with the election. This guy has vaulted from 13% to 43%, and this is from Bloomberg. So, in the election coming up on the 7th of October, more than likely we're going to see Haddad and Bolsonaro, and then take the top 2 slots, and then once everybody else is taken away, then the final runoff election more than likely is going to put Haddad in power, and that presents a problem for the United States, especially when it comes to their desire to overthrow Venezuela. And I brought up a map to show you this, what the U.S. is facing now. If Venezuela, who can already count on Mexico, Honduras, and Nicaragua, and Bolivia, and Cuba, if they can get an ally in Brazil, which, believe me, if Haddad wins, his running mate, we've talked about before, I've brought her picture up, she's that real smoking hot, blonde, Manuela Davila. The U.S. is going to have a problem, especially with the Chinese and the Russians backing the Venezuelans. It's going to be an operational problem. Because As much as some of these countries down here don't get along, the one thing they all kind of are on the same sheet of music on is they really don't like U.S. involvement, especially militarily. The only place down here that welcomes this is Colombia. Now, I know Peru could play into this, but I'm telling you, this guy that took over, this Martin Vizcarra, who surprisingly, right before the U.S. leader was supposed to go down there, Kaczynski stepped down, Vizcarra stepped in, and then the U.S. canceled the visit. Because Vizcarra is tied to the Shining Path. The Shining Path, we covered them last March. Very successful, powerful terrorist organization, primarily from the 80s and 90s. It's been reported that they're not nearly as effective as they used to be, but they are still carrying out attacks. And they're communists. They are hardcore communists. And he has, this Martin Vizcarra, has ties to them. His grandfather actually met the man and was friends with the man that founded the Shining Path. So I don't think we're going to be able to count on Peru as an ally. Ecuador is a voting member of OPEC, along with Venezuela. So there's going to be that consideration as well. So it's going to be a steep uphill climb, especially with Costa Rica being in bed with the Chinese, Panama being in bed with the Chinese. The Dominican very recently announced this. This is what we're facing. And Brazil, being the number 10 or 11 military in the world, would be, if they were not on board for this, for the U.S. militarily intervening in Venezuela, it could make Vietnam seem like nothing if we were to put people down there. Especially with these people having the financing and the backing of the Russians and the Chinese. So what really bothers me about all this, the last place I'll leave on this argument is this. What I think the Chinese have done is they have created a situation down there where the U.S. is not going to be able to do anything until this ship leaves. And I don't know what its schedule is or when it's scheduled to depart, but I think this was just an overture, a sign to the United States that, look, we're serious about Venezuela. We are serious about investing in Venezuela and having them be our allies. Since you don't want them as your ally, since you've done everything you literally possibly could in the last 2 years to alienate and vilify pretty much all of Latin America, we have absolutely no problem opening a dialogue down here and having them be our ally. China needs oil like crazy, and they would love nothing more than to have access to the gold and the oil and the resources in Venezuela. It is a perplexing thing for me to understand with the current administration. And this is an honest question. I would like to really ask this question of those who support him. I've used this map before, and everybody always focuses on Israel in the middle. This is the countries scaled to the economic aid they receive from the United States. Now, yeah, 3.1 billion, but if you take all of the countries that are Muslim majority down here, the vast majority of which never made it onto a travel ban list, far exceeds Israel. Far exceeds. And this hasn't changed in the last 2 years. Why in the world would we be willing to sit down and talk and deal with this guy, Muhammadu Buhari, who was quoted as saying, and he's never denied it, that he would never stop for the agitation for the promotion of Sharia law around the world? Huge Muslim majority country, violent Muslim terrorists in Nigeria, and all throughout Africa. Why would we cut deals, sit down, invite this guy to the White House, and do what we've done to Nicolas Maduro, who, when this man was elected, when the current leader of the United States stepped into office, reached out and said, this guy cannot possibly be worse than Obama was. That's what Nicolas Maduro said about the current leadership. Tried to reach out, tried to say, I know we have our differences, can we fix them? And has had continually his hands swiped away over and over and over and over again by the United States, a country that's 80% Christian. And yeah, we can debate about different types of Christianity, Catholicism or whatever, but we have a lot more in common with these people than we do the people here that are receiving way, 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 way more aid when you look at them as a whole than Israel. And when you look over here in the corner, I mean, this area down here, South America, that if we took half of this money and invested it down here, we could get rid of the drug problem. Simply just by bringing the standard of living up and giving these people some options, some better options than to be in the employ of the cartels. This money over here is down the drain. These billions and billions and billions. These people are never going to be our ally. Never. So that would be my question. If we can reach out to Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, Duterte, and all of these horrible Muhari, why in the world is this guy a bridge too far in our hemisphere? Given at one time, these people were our ally, helped us win World War II, provided the oil necessary for the sorties from England into France to push out the Nazis. That was Venezuelan oil. Yes, it was. This is the part that absolutely, to my mind, might be the largest socio-political miscalculation of the century for the United States. This thing in Venezuela. So, I'm not going to waste a whole lot more of your Sunday, but what the big deal is in Nigeria versus the gains that could be made in our hemisphere just doesn't seem to make any sense for me. So, we will leave it there, but do understand that this is more than likely all going to hinge on what happens in Brazil. The first round of elections is the 7th, and with Bolsonaro moving into the lead now with 43-40, he was down 26-13, now he's up 43-40. That's how big of a shift has happened since Lula da Silva endorsed him. And if the Brazilians, I tell you what, this is what it could look like. This is where World War III could start right here. And this is exactly how it would play. And that's not pretty. So we will leave it there. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.